Hey guys, it's Kristen here. Today I'm going to be talking all about my birth experience. I've had so many people ask me how my experience went and requested that I tell my birth story, and I figured I might as well do it the way I know how to do best, which is make a video on it. So here I am, and my hopes in making this video is to just tell you my side of how my birth experience went. Everybody has a completely different experience when it comes to birth. I even had a different experience than my mom, and you most likely will too, or already did have a different experience than your mom. And so everybody's experience is different. Everybody's pregnancies are different from each other. My pregnancy and birth experience for my first kid now might be different than my future labor and deliveries. And so I'm just gonna tell you how it went this time. And hopefully this will help some of you soon-to-be moms kind of get an idea of one of the millions of things that can happen to you. So here we go. So I had a pretty smooth pregnancy, which I'm super grateful for. I had a healthy pregnancy the entire time. Things went really well and things were good to go. At about 38 weeks, I went into my doctor for my annual checkup, and he basically said, all right, you've had a healthy pregnancy. I am willing to induce you whenever you want. If you want to be induced at 39 weeks, there you go, we'll do it. If you want to wait clear till 42 weeks, I'm good with that too. And I was like, what? Like, as a new mom who's never done this before, who I really just kind of wanted him to tell me what to do. And my doctor's awesome. He was just like, you know what? It's honestly your decision. I will support you on whatever you want to do because your pregnancy has been healthy. And so you decide if you want to be induced or if you'd like to see if your body will go into labor 42 weeks, then you can do that. So think about it and let me know. And I went home so confused on what to do because first of all, I was super scared to go through labor and delivery for the first time. So I was like, oh, I don't want to be induced at 39 weeks and I don't want to force the baby out, you know? I kind of want to see how long my body will go. But at the same time, I thought, should I wait until 42 weeks? Because there's complications as you wait longer. I don't want the baby to get too big and then have it be super hard to deliver him at that point. But at the same time, you know, I want to see like how long it takes my body in order to go into labor on its own. I was also fighting this question of whether my body would go into labor on my own. My mom's side of the family has a history of women not going into labor on their own. My mom was induced at 42 weeks with all of her kids. Her body never even produced a contraction on its own. Same with my grandma and her mom. And I thought, man, that might be me, which was kind of not true. I ended up having some Braxton Hicks contractions that were really mild leading up to when I had him. But other than that, yeah. So then I started to get really nervous on what to do. Because this might sound silly, my son was going to be due between a very interesting date. So he was due on August 26th. Now around here where we live, the school deadline is September 1st. And I thought I had a lot of pressure on me to make the right decision on when he was born, because I know that whatever grade of school that you go into, when you go into it, the people that you meet while you grow up is super important. It will shape your life as it did mine. And I thought, I really don't want to make the wrong decision, you know? And part of you would think that like, well, if you're that worried about it, then just wait for your body to go into labor on your own. That way, God will tell you when he's supposed to be born. I decided to just wait it out until my due date. And my due date came around, and the next day, my doctor had me come in to check me, monitor the baby, measure him, make sure he was doing okay. And he was doing great. And they said he was looking around 7.5 to 8.5 pounds. There's like a 1 pound discrepancy between it. And so he could be anywhere between that amount of weight. And I thought, okay, well, what happens if I wait like another week or two? How much weight is he going to gain in that amount of time? I am so scared to deliver this massive baby for my first time, and I don't want to deliver a huge baby if I don't have to. So I kind of panicked a little bit, and I really thought about it a long time. And so I decided to schedule an induction for 40 weeks, 4 days. So I went in at the beginning of that week and I would go in to be induced on that Friday. I was actually surprised that I ended up choosing to be induced because I really didn't want to be induced. I had watched all of these vlogs on YouTube about these women who were saying how hard it was to give birth on Pitocin. For those who don't know, they put Pitocin in you to get induced, which mimics contractions. It forces your body to have contractions to give birth like you normally would naturally. Everybody that I had heard on YouTube and who had ever gone through it said Pitocin makes your contractions a lot more aggressive, a lot quicker, and it's a lot harder to handle. And me being naive and not ever having done this before, I was scared. I didn't want to do it, but I ended up doing it. And long story short, I had a really good induction experience. I went in on Friday morning at 6 a.m. and got checked in. It took me about an hour and a half to get checked in, and by 7:30 a.m. I was hooked up to Pitocin. Now, everybody's body reacts differently to Pitocin. Some women get hooked up to Pitocin and their body just goes for it and starts contracting and really making progress. Mine wasn't like that. So when I actually went in, I believe I was at about 3 centimeters dilated. So, it was okay. And they started me on Pitocin, and for a couple of hours, I just sat there and really felt nothing. I was having some contractions, obviously, but wasn't really progressing. And so after a little bit of time, your nurse will come in and she'll up your dose of Pitocin until you're completely maxed out of Pitocin. So she kept coming in and increasing the dosage, and I really wasn't feeling anything. It was really boring. I was just sitting there passing the time. And to be honest, I was really nervous. I really didn't know what to expect going in to labor and delivery. I went in with no expectations because I wanted to go in knowing that anything can happen. There might be complications. I might have to get a C-section, but to not be freaked out about it, just to go in and just accept that whatever happens is what's going to happen. So they kept increasing my Pitocin dosage and wasn't feeling anything. And then if I remember right, I feel like these are very jaded views because when you're on Pitocin, it does weird things to you. The whole day just felt really weird. It's kind of foggy to me. But my doctor came in, I think, about 11 a.m. And my doctor is so chill. The one thing that's awesome about him is that he's just really casual and he makes you feel really comfortable. Like it's not like this crazy big of a deal if it doesn't need to be. And he came in, he was like, "You want to break your water?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." Like I wasn't expecting us to get going that quickly. He came in and he broke my water and he said, "Okay, once I do this, just know it's going to start getting more intense from here on out." And I was like, okay. So he broke my water. It was completely fine. It was super fast. And once they break your water, man, it just comes out and comes out and comes out. But they did inform me that they found meconium in the womb when they broke my water. And for those who don't know what that is, that's basically baby waste. They said, well, you're over your due date, so it's a good chance that your baby pooped in the womb. It's going to be okay, but we have to monitor it because if they inhaled some of that meconium while in the womb, there could be issues. So we'll have to monitor that. And I was like, okay, great. So once they broke my water, my contractions did get pretty intense. And my whole life, I always thought that labor contractions would just feel like intense menstrual cramps. And at least for me, they were surprisingly very different. They were like this burning in my back and in my hips and in my stomach area as well, but mostly in my back and my hips. And it was intense. I have a low pain tolerance, and so I really didn't know how long I could go. I did go into the hospital planning on having an epidural because I know myself well enough to know that I have such a low pain tolerance, I would not be able to do it without an epidural. So I planned on an epidural, and there's one anesthesiologist for the whole day at the hospital that I was at. And him and my nurse told me, they said, just know that there are 2 other girls here this morning who both came in to get induced like you, who are both progressing the same amount of time as you, who have both requested an epidural like you. And just know, like, you may want to ask for your epidural sooner than later so that just in case when you get really bad, you go to ask for it, that you don't have to wait for the other 2 girls to be getting theirs while you're in so much pain. And so I was like, okay. So I was sitting there having these contractions and just kind of like experiencing them. And I honestly don't know how long I had contractions. I want to say I'm gonna have to ask my husband. After they broke my water, went for about an hour or two, maybe. I don't remember. Time went by super fast that day, but I want to say that I went that long, and I wanted to prove to myself that I could go as long as possible, and I didn't want to seem like a pansy to everybody else. I know that sounds so dumb, but I have such a low pain tolerance, and I've never done this before. I just didn't want to have to request it super early, and so I just waited, and they kept kind of telling me, okay, let us know whenever you're ready to have that epidural. Now, I should also preface that I was really scared to get my epidural. I saw some pretty scary YouTube videos of women having horrible epidural experiences, super painful. And I'm being completely honest, I went in that day more scared to get my epidural than to go through labor and delivery. But I knew that I was going to want to have it because I knew it was going to be worth it in the end. So finally, I just thought I'm going to have to do this sooner or later. So I requested the anesthesiologist to come in and give me my epidural. And I am so glad that I requested him when I did, because it took about 30 minutes for him to come after I called for him. And in those 30 minutes, my contractions got really painful, really painful. He came in and he's like, you lucked out because the minute you called me in, so did the other two girls. So you get to be done first. And I was like, oh, thank goodness. I had a great epidural experience. The anesthesiologist that I had did an amazing job. What can be really hard about an epidural is that you have to hold completely still for them to put it in while you're going through hard contractions. But what was so great about my anesthesiologist is that he told me, all right, so I'm gonna make this as easy as possible for you. Whenever you're having a contraction, just let me know and I'll stop. And I'll let you bear out the contraction and then we'll keep going. And so that's what we did. Earlier in that day, I had told my nurse, I said, yeah, I'm really scared for the epidural. And she was like, honestly, it'll probably hurt more for us to put your IV in than it will be to get your epidural. And that really was the case. My IV that they put in hurt so bad, but all it really felt like when they did my epidural was a little bee sting. Really, it was just a quick bee sting, and then it just felt like some pressure against my spine as they threaded it up through my spine. Now, when they were giving me my epidural, the anesthesiologist said, okay, I do want to tell you that your epidural went in super well, but there's a chance that it might not work 100% effectively because your hips are really out of alignment. And I was like, oh, I know. My hips and my whole back and everything were just like sloshing out of place the last few weeks of pregnancy. I was like, okay, great. So he put it in and I was good to go. And the minute that epidural kicked in, it felt great. But as time progressed throughout the next hour or two, I didn't feel anything except for in my lower back and in my hips on my left side. And that was because my hips were out of alignment. Basically what he told me might happen happened. It wasn't too bad, but it was enough to where it was really uncomfortable. One thing I would have done differently throughout that day is I didn't know that I could ask for more doses and more doses and more doses of Pitocin. I didn't want to, I just was super naive going into it. And I was just so worried about what other people would think, which is so dumb. As time progressed, it was just super boring. I kind of didn't ask for more doses of my epidural. I should let you guys know that during this whole time, they maxed me out on Pitocin for a long time. And honestly, it made me feel so jittery. It is the weirdest feeling I've ever felt. And I think a lot of it has to do with the part that I was maxed out on Pitocin for so long, on the highest amount that they could give me for so long, that it just made me so jittery. The only way I can describe it is that I felt cold, but not necessarily, and it just made me shake uncontrollably. And it especially got really bad towards the evening time, and I was just shaking uncontrollably. I literally looked like I was convulsing, and my husband was like, oh my gosh, are you okay? My mom was like, yeah, I remember this is what I did when I was maxed out on Pitocin. That's what it did to you. And so that is one thing I really didn't like about Pitocin, is I didn't feel in control of myself. I just felt like I was shaking so bad. And I was actually worried about being able to push when the time came because I didn't feel like I had control of my body. But pushing ended up helping down the road. They kept checking me and my body was progressing so slowly. And I expected that because, most women, for their first baby, their body progresses slowly because it's not used to it. This is something new for your body. And so my body was progressing slowly, and I think I was about a 7 or an 8 centimeters dilated. And they said, okay, we're gonna put a peanut ball in between your legs and have you labor down for a couple of hours. Your doctor wants you to labor down, and then we'll check you, and then if you're good to go, then we'll start pushing. So that's what I did. I had a peanut ball in between my legs and I labored down for a few hours, and that did wonders. But they made me labor down for like way longer than they said they would, I swear. And I knew, like, maybe it was mother's intuition, but I knew that I was probably dilated to a 10 and ready to push. But they still hadn't come in yet. They still hadn't checked me. You know, I was still on the epidural, so I couldn't feel anything. And so I just sat there, and I think that my son was in the birth canal so long before pushing, and it took me forever to push, that, you know, that's why he came out with such a cone head and so smushed. So finally they checked me and I was at a 10, and they said, okay, we're gonna start pushing. So we started to push. And, you know, as I look back, I just felt so like I just did not know what I was doing. And there's a lot more I'll try to do better next time. But there's a certain way you need to push in order to successfully get your baby out. And I pushed for 2 hours, which ended up being super grueling on my body. And it's something that I hope that will not take that long next time. But I pushed for 2 hours. Now, during the first hour, I honestly, now that I think about it, I was really mentally out of it. I was maxed out on Pitocin. I had an epidural. I was tired and my brain was just kind of mush, but I was just kind of doing what they were telling me to do. And I started pushing and I was pushing, and it just felt like no progress was happening at all. And they were like, okay, all you have to do, like the biggest milestone you need to reach is getting your baby's head past the pelvic bone, and then like it's all gonna be great from that point on. So I just felt like I was pushing forever and forever and forever. About after an hour of pushing, my nurse was like, okay, I want you to do this, this, and this. Really relax while you're pushing, and that will help. And so that really did help. And that second hour, I made a lot more progress, and I did not want to have a mirror to see what was going on down there. I didn't know if it would make me feel more psyched out because, you know, a lot happens down there and I didn't want to. But the last half an hour, I had no idea how my body was progressing. They weren't really telling me, they were just kept telling me to push. And because I had an epidural, I had pressure down there, but I couldn't really feel. And so I requested a mirror last minute, and I'm so glad I did, because I was able to see his head and I was able to see how well I was progressing, and that gave me the motivation I needed to finish out to the end. Now, like I said before, I let my epidural run too low. I didn't request enough dosage, and so I felt a lot towards the end, because they told me, they said, you know, you shouldn't have any pain, but you should be able to feel some pressure so that you can push the baby out towards the end. And so I was just so naive and I didn't know, and so I didn't request it, and I let it run way too low, and I felt way too much toward the end, way too much. And I now regret that. And it was very painful, very, very painful. Just feels like everything is exploding down there, really. Part of me was like, holding back from pushing because I didn't want to cause a lot of damage down there, but at the same time I'm like, okay, I need to hurry and push him out because this is the only way. So finally I got him out, and what's so crazy about becoming a parent is that you don't necessarily plan on it, but the minute your baby comes out, it's just very emotional. You cry, and you know, you're so relieved that it's all done. And it was such a great experience. So I did tear. I had a 2nd-degree tear. So during all of this, I'm holding the baby and they're checking him and everything. And during that, my doctor is stitching me up. And I felt all of it. It was so painful. And he was like, whoa, you're not supposed to be feeling all of this. And I think it's because I let my epidural run too low. So that was really fun. I had my sister take some videos of when it happened, just for personal use for our family. And I looked back at those and I'm like, ow, 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 as they're stitching me up. But I remember hearing my doctor say, after he was born, I remember him saying to the nurses, hey, she's bleeding a lot more than what is normal. I need you to get this and this and this for me. And that's all I remember hearing. But now that I look back at it, I think I bled a lot more than what is normal. And I lost a lot of blood because of what happened later on. They hooked me off of the epidural, and everybody left the room and it was just the nurse, me, my baby, and my husband. And my nurse said, okay, now I'm gonna let you go and shower, and all of your stuff is in there, and I'll be out here if you need any help. So I went in there, and I want to say I was in there for maybe 15 minutes, just took a shower. It felt so nice to get a hot shower. And then I came out, and I've never felt anything like it before. I literally felt like I was going to pass out. And it was the scariest feeling I've ever felt. I literally felt like I was dying. I think what had happened was I had lost so much blood in labor and delivery, and I exerted myself way too much getting that 15-minute shower, and I overdid myself, and I was just on the brink of passing out. And I was trying to communicate this to my nurse while she's working on Ben, and my husband's obsessing over the baby. And I was trying to tell them, like, guys, I keep almost blacking out. Like, my vision was blurry. I felt awful. And my nurse just kind of like brushed it off like it wasn't a big deal. And in that moment, I realized, like, wow, this is what motherhood is. Putting yourself at the bottom of the totem pole and putting everyone else above your own. I didn't have a great experience at the hospital I was at, which is apparently really rare compared to everyone I've talked to, but I had some really bad experiences with the nurses. She didn't really think it was that big of a deal. I was like almost pleading with her, saying, please, I am literally blacking out every 2 seconds. It was the scariest feeling I've ever felt. I felt so weak and so horrible. And I was just super scared. And she's like, I have this little pellet that you can smell that's really bitter smelling that will kind of wake you up a little bit. So I did that, and it helped like 2%. And from then on until like the next day and a half, 2 days, I felt like that. And the nurses didn't really care, didn't really do anything to help me. And because of that, I was having a really hard time throughout the hospital the rest of the time. So that was my birth experience, and it went really well. I want to say that I'm really grateful it went really well, because I wanted my first labor and delivery experience to be good so that I'd want more kids in the future. All right, sorry, someone woke up from his nap, so I'll just have him in the video the rest of the time. So yeah, my postpartum experience was a little bit harder. So earlier in my pregnancy, I was diagnosed with GBS, which is a bacterial infection that 1 in 4 pregnant women have. It's super normal. A lot of people can have it. Most people live with it, and it's not a big deal, but it can be a big deal with babies when they're born as they're passing through the birth canal. So basically they gave me antibiotics during labor and delivery to make sure that he was okay. And because I was GBS positive, they had me stay in the hospital an extra day so that they could monitor him. So we stayed in the hospital an extra day, and I didn't have good nurses. That first day, our nurses forgot about us for almost a complete day. They weren't monitoring me or checking on him, which is a big no-no. I really think that they should have been fired. We ended up informing their boss, and I heard that they almost did get fired, but we were never apologized to or anything like that. But because they weren't monitoring me and I had almost felt like I was going to pass out, I just stayed in that uncomfortable hospital bed the entire time, which ended up being a huge problem. Because when you give birth like that and you are able to, you really need to get up and walk around so that you don't get edema, which is what I got. I was in this super uncomfortable hospital bed, and guys, I'm 5'10", and this hospital bed wasn't long enough for me. And it has like a bar on the end of the bed so that I couldn't like even extend my legs past the bed. I ended up being super uncomfortable. I wasn't walking around, and it ended up being really bad. So we stayed a day extra after labor and delivery so that they could monitor him. But here's the problem. He had not had a bowel movement since being born, and they wouldn't let me leave the hospital until he had a bowel movement. However, he was born with meconium in the womb. And my doctor, the pediatrician that was assigned to us, who we ended up hating, told me we cannot count meconium as the first bowel movement because we've done that in the past and it ended up being throw up instead, and we just want to monitor him and make sure he's okay. So I said, okay, I'm going to stick through this terrible room where I'm super uncomfortable another day, and hopefully I'll get to go home the next day. And guys, not only did he have meconium in the womb, but I was trying to breastfeed. And when you're trying to breastfeed, you're basically producing nothing. And I later found out I literally produced nothing. And because of that, he was getting nothing in his system. So obviously, yeah, he couldn't make a bowel movement. So another day went by, and the doctor checked him and said, I'm going to make you stay another day. And another day went by, and we were there for 4 days, guys. 4 days of sitting in a terrible room with nurses that were not good, who weren't checking up on us, and I wasn't moving around. And so during that time, I got severe edema. And what that is all of the fluid that my body had accumulated for the pregnancy drained to my legs and my feet. I mean, my legs and feet were massive, like elephants. It was so bad that I couldn't even lift them up. They were so heavy, I couldn't even lift them up, and I couldn't even walk. My mom said she'd never seen anything like it. I was having a hard time recovering, and I was on no sleep, and all of this was happening. And that 4th day, I just broke down. I told my husband, I said, if a bowel movement is so important, why can't we wait it out at home? Why can't we wait for him to have a bowel movement at home? Why do we have to stay in this horrible hospital that I feel so uncomfortable in, that our nurses are not even checking up on us, and I'm not healing? Why do we need to stay here when we can just monitor this kind of thing at home? And I remember the last time that pediatrician came in, I told him, I was like, I want to go home. I was on the verge of tears. I basically was crying. I just lost it. And I remember the night before when he told me that I couldn't go home, I just bawled and bawled and bawled. And I told him, please, can we just go home? Why can't we just go home? And then finally, when I called him out, he was like, okay, well, the minute he has a bowel movement, I'll tell the nurses to discharge you right away. And so they did. And luckily, a few hours later, he had his first bowel movement. We called the nurse right away, and we were out of there. Within the next hour. We were out of there within the next hour. And so, yeah, once we got home, I healed so much better. My edema was able to go down after a few days. And so overall, I had a really good experience. I had a hard postpartum experience at the hospital, and it makes it to where I am really scared to go to that hospital again. So I don't know what I'm going to be doing, but overall, I had a decent experience, and I'm really glad that I did. So that's my birth experience. I'm sure that the next one will be very different. I forgot to mention that he was born at 7 pounds, 14 ounces, so he wasn't very big, and I'm glad that I ended up getting induced. I had a great epidural experience. Things went really well, and I'm so glad, and I feel so grateful. Through labor and delivery, my back and my pelvic area and everything got so out of whack that I couldn't even walk for several weeks afterwards. It felt like my pelvic bone and everything was sticking forward when I walked, and it was super painful, super awkward, and I ended up going to get chiropractic work for that. And I'm sure that my 2 hours of pushing had a lot to do with that. So I'm hoping that my next birth goes a lot smoother and a lot faster. But honestly, I'm very grateful, and I count myself lucky for such a great birth experience. Things went well. Yeah, that's my birth experience. And you know what? It was all worth it, because this cute little guy ended up being the result. Hopefully that kind of gave you somewhat of an idea of what might happen to you, maybe what to make sure that you do when you have your baby. Make sure you request a lot of dosages of your epidural. Make sure that you walk around after you give birth if you're able to. Don't be afraid to call nurses out. That is one thing that I think I'll do in the future, is to tell people what you want. I mean, this is your experience. You're paying them a lot of money to be there. You tell them what you want. And so, yeah, hopefully you guys liked this video. I'm hoping to make a couple more videos like this in the future about my breastfeeding journey and why I chose to do formula, and more things about motherhood, because honestly, I feel like all of us need to share our experiences. I feel like all of us need to share our experiences so that all of us know that we're not alone. And so, yeah, thanks for watching this video. We'll see you next time. Say bye-bye. Bye.